Good morning, everyone. You're all very welcome. So welcome to today's seminar. This is the first in a series of free events hosted by Transparency International Ireland and the Whistleblowing International Network to raise awareness of the European Union 2019 Directive on Whistleblower Protection and the evolution of whistleblowing rights across the EU. These seminars are part of a regional programme of activities implemented by Transparency International, known as the Strengthening and Fostering Enabling Environments for Whistleblowers, which is made possible thanks to funding by the EU's Citizens' Rights and Values Programme. My name is Ida Nowers, and I am Knowledge and Policy Manager at Transparency International Ireland and Coordinator of the EU Whistleblowing Monitor. For those who do not know, the EU Whistleblowing Monitor is an online platform developed by Whistleblowing International Network in collaboration with Transparency International EU and the European Council of Professional and Managerial Staff who are participating today, shortly after the EU adopted this directive on whistleblowing. Its purpose is to monitor the transposition across member states, share opportunities and learnings for both civil society actors, trade unions, policymakers, and for the general public, for citizens to learn more about how their governments are approaching the transposition or implementation of these new whistleblowing rights. The EU Monitor is currently being redeveloped under the Safer Whistleblowers programme that I mentioned before, and I will share more on that later. Next slide, please, Ed. Today's seminar, we're focusing on trade unions and their role and their insights on workplace whistleblowing in the EU since the adoption of the EU directive. Unions have been at the front line of the advocacy for stronger whistleblower protections and have a key role to play in these evolving national and EU-wide whistleblowing landscapes, as these rights do extend into the workplace, of course. We have a number of esteemed speakers today from both leading whistleblower protection organisations and from trade union side. Before we begin, a minute of housekeeping. Please be aware that this session is being recorded and will be made available on the EU Whistleblowing Monitor and on the websites of the organisations collaborating on this seminar today. This seminar will run for 90 minutes and include a panel discussion, question and answer session, and a short wrap-up and survey at the end. Please put your questions in the chat and stay muted for now. We will answer as many as we can after the interventions from the speakers. As part of this session, we are also launching a new briefing paper and a short guide to the EU directive for trade unions. A copy will be disseminated shortly, and I'll also be sharing other resources mentioned by the speakers, so do keep an eye on the chat through the session. We are delighted this morning to benefit from opening remarks from Christel Mercadet, a legal officer at the EU Commission, and Naila Glaze, president of Eurocadres, a key player in pushing forward a proposal for the EU to act on the topic of whistleblowing protection. The panel discussion today will be moderated by Anna Myers, Executive Director of Whistleblowing International Network, who will introduce the other speakers. Now, to kick things off, I want to thank the EU Commission for joining us this afternoon and get straight to introducing our first speaker. Christel Mercadet is a lawyer specialised in the protection of EU fundamental rights. She works for the European Commission's Unit of Fundamental Rights Policies within the Directorate General for Justice. Her main areas of work include the enforcement of the EU Directive on Whistleblowing and the Charter of Fundamental Rights, particularly in relation to freedom of expression, the right to non-discrimination and employment-related rights. She was part of the team responsible for drafting and negotiating the EU Whistleblower Directive, and so I will pass the floor with great pleasure to Christel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me today to make the introductory remarks of this very important project under our funding. It's a project that we are following very close, so I wish this seminar to be very fruitful and useful for all the participants. As an introductory remark, I wanted to tackle a bit the root cause of this very much seminar, which is why we have a EU directive and where we will stand with this directive on whistleblower protection. Just as a brief mention, as many of you may remember, back in 2017, we had a number of scandals that proved that whistleblowers were essential elements of the detection and monitoring systems of breaches of the law, both at national and EU level. But at the same time, we saw blatantly that a number of those whistleblowers who had provided evidence to the authorities had suffered retaliation for such courageous bring forward of evidence of breaches of the law. And together with a number of stakeholders, we worked on a proposal that now is a directive. The directive was adopted in 2019, and it has to be transposed in all EU member states from December 2021. And just going through the main pillars of this directive, aims to facilitate whistleblowing at the largest sense. So on the one side, the directive's objective is to fit national and EU enforcement authorities to detect, investigate, and prosecute breaches of EU rules. But on the other side, it aims to provide strong level of protection for whistleblowers, not only to encourage them to report and to fit further the national authorities or the authorities with evidence of breaches of the rules, but also in their capacity of uh, let's say, feeding system of the investigative journalism, because at the very core of the protection of whistleblowers, there is also the protection of freedom of expression and of the protection of the society to know about information that follows within the general interest. As I said, the directive aims to facilitate whistleblowing in the largest sense. So, as many of you are already very acquainted with it, but just to go through the main pillars of the directive, it includes the widest possible category of people who can report breaches of EU rules, has an obligation to set up internal and external channels, both in the public sector and in the private sector, on those companies with 50 or more employees. The channels need to be confidential and easily accessible. There is a possibility for public disclosure when the external channels are deemed not to work, on cases where there is imminent danger or imminent damage. There is also a clear statement on that retaliation is prohibited in all its forms, with a number of cases listed in the directive, but set up as an open list of measures of retaliation. And of course, the directive also provides for legal remedies, or adequate remedies actually, in case retaliation occurs, which go from interim remedies to the reversal of the burden of proof to the need to ensure provision of adequate remedies such as compensation or reinstatement, etc. The idea of the directive is to make sure that people feel safe when they speak, and that have easily accessible channels to report, and that they are protected in case they suffer retaliation. As the Commission stated in the report on transposition, people must be able to fully understand where to report, how to report, and to which extent their rights and conditions of protection apply. They must be able also to take informed decisions on how are the risks to bring forward the evidence, and to make sure that they do not fall between the cracks because of the vagueness of ambiguities of national laws. The directive's main pillar is to provide thus the necessary legal certainty to whistleblowers to ensure that they report in accordance with the directive and that they do not suffer retaliation for it. And let me remark that in this directive, the role of social partners is very prominent. We, at the time of the drafting of the directive and during the negotiation of the directive, the Commission saw social partners as an essential and multifaceted role within the implementation of whistleblower protection. On the one side, because as the directive provides for, the rules in the public and private entities on whistleblower protection and how to establish internal channels should be established following consultation with the social partners, and if appropriate as well to trade unions, but also because we saw trade unions as having a particular role also as supporters of or facilitators of whistleblowers within the chain of the reporting systems. Moreover, the directive also provides for those cases where it is appropriate that trade unions could act as recipients of whistleblower reports or even public disclosures. And also, as I said, the trade unions or social partners could work as a role of providing advice, support to whistleblowers, and even legal advice in cases where this is provided for. And now, what has happened since the adoption of the directive? Last year, the Commission issued a transposition report to explain how the directive was adopted. But let me tell you that this was not the only thing that the Commission did. So as of 2021, December 2021, the directive had to be transposed in all member states. This led the Commission to have a close monitoring of how the directive was transposed since December 2021, which led the Commission to bring to court 6 member states and the condemnation of 6 member states for not having transposed the directive in time. And as I mentioned last year, we issued a report on how member states have transposed the directive in the national legal orders, which from this point of view, we are currently having bilateral dialogues with a number of member states to ensure or to discuss how their legal framework provide for the transposition of the directive. But also, let me tell you that the legal framework is not the only focus that we have currently at the Commission. The idea is to also provide for a number of policy measures that support all this legal work at EU level. So not only we have set up a dedicated EU forum with all the member states, but also with some civil society organizations to make sure that there is a correct and adequate exchange of good practices. And we have set up a line of specific funding to support civil society organizations in the area of whistleblower protection, which is the line of funding where this project is funded from. I think there is somebody with the sound on. No. Okay, I'm almost about to finish. In terms of next steps, the Commission now is ensuring that we launched an evaluation of the directive. This is prescribed in the directive's legal obligations. So from this last quarter onwards, there will be a number of actions aimed at evaluating of the directive, including the launch of a public consultation, both to all general public, but also to relevant stakeholders with expertise in the area of whistleblower protection. So thank you very much for this opportunity to go through a bit the path of the directive, and I wish a good seminar.
Thank you very much indeed, Christelle, for these remarks and the important introduction, the background and the context, and of course, highlighting the important role that trade unions play in having effective whistleblower protection. It's been very interesting for me personally to follow the work of your department in this area, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing the future work that you just mentioned and the evaluation. I think there's many people interested in that. So thank you very much indeed. If I may now move on to thank also Eurocad, who are joining us, and invite Naila Glazer to give us some insights as one of the leading voices in the trade union movement on this topic. So Naila is the president of Eurocadres, the European Council of Professionals and Managers, leading the representation of over 6 million European workers in policy development. She acts as the most senior representative of professionals and managers in European affairs, has been extensively involved on supporting setting whistleblowing channels at the company level and advocating for national and European legislation. Naila, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aida, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. Good morning, colleagues, and you are very welcome to this webinar on protecting workers who speak up, trade union insights on workplace whistleblowing in the EU. So as Aida said, I'm president of Eurocadres, and it's the European trade union representing professionals and managers. And I would like to emphasize that the role of the professionals and managers in the workplace is essential when it comes to whistleblowing. And this is the reason why also Eurocadres with the WIN and a big coalition of NGOs were at the initiative of the whistleblowing directive since many years now. And also, we continue this work, actually, as you can see with this webinar, but also at the national level. So in order to monitor a good transposition, but also especially a good implementation of the whistleblowing directive in the workplace. But first of all, like 5 years, like I know Crystal presented the directive a little bit, but I would like to say also a few words that what are we talking about here? The whistleblowing directive, as Crystal mentioned, provides strong common standards for the protection of whistleblowers who are individuals who report wrongdoing within an organization. Every day, new health, environmental, and political scandals emerge, and behind them are when men and women who have the courage to expose the truth. The work that Eurocadres has carried out with the coalition over several years has resulted in this directive that protects the whistleblowers and guarantees them a status allowing them to avoid the reprisals they face, such as dismissals from the workplace, intimidation, or even threats to their personal lives. But I would like also to remind us a few victories of this directive. It covers the public and the private sector and a wide range of potential whistleblowers, including employees. They can be also volunteers, interns, suppliers, subcontractors, shareholders, former employees, or even job applicants. So anyone can report or expose a crime or offense, a threat, or serious harm to the public interest. The directive protects not only the whistleblowers, but also the individuals who assist them. And this is also very important in the workplace. And as Crystal mentioned, for companies with more than 50 employees, the reporting channels must be established in the workplace. And also for the municipalities over 50 employees or more than 10,000 inhabitants, so that the whistleblowers can report internally in the workplace or directly to the competent authorities. And this is very important for the trade unions. We have been claiming to be able to negotiate how these internal reporting channels are set in the workplace. And this occurred also in some companies. The directive opens the possibility to report anonymously and provides penalties to persons who hinder or attempt to hinder reporting. It also foresees legal and financial assistance to whistleblowers. And 5 years after the directive came into force, many questions are raised. The current trend, we can see that at the EU level, but also on some national level, we have a current trend of deregulation. It also threatens to water down the directive, which is already a compromise for us and has several limitations. So this is something that we would never accept. The directive has involved important players in the society. We have seen that institutions have been created or adapted to provide support, advice, and follow-up for whistleblowers. In France, for instance, la Maison des lanceurs d'alerte is particularly active, but also government bodies such as the Defenders of Rights. What practices are adopted by these organizations? How are reporting channels used by the workers and the unions? How is anonymous reporting ensured? What is the role of the unions in this process? Are there countries that have gone beyond the scope of the directive? And especially, have we succeeded in changing companies' culture to a speak-up culture in the interests of all? Well, I think to answer all these questions, we have a panel debate that will follow up in the next hour. But I would like to add one last thing, is that Eurocadres roles in regard to whistleblowers does not stop here. We will continue this work with the aim of improving the scope of the directive and ensuring its greater involvement, the greater involvement of the trade unions in the workplaces. Thank you, Ida. I give you back the floor.
Thank you so much, Naila, for this very pithy overview of the reforms that the directive requires. It's helpful even for myself, who's been following this for some time, to remember quite how substantial and ambitious this project is, and of course this inspiring call to arms for trade unionists to get their teeth stuck in more, and importantly pushing things forward for whistleblowers. So in the interest of time, I'm going to very speedily now introduce the moderator of the panel discussion that comes next. Anna Myers is Executive Director of the Whistleblowing International Network, known as WIN, which is a global membership organization which connects civil society organizations who support and defend public interest whistleblowers. And WIN has become the leading hub of expertise on whistleblower protection, law and practice. Its membership comprises a growing number of nonprofits around the world which provide direct access to support, including legal assistance to whistleblowers and other actors which have developed whistleblowing-related activities. They are also a key player, like Eurocadres, in the advocacy to bring about this EU directive. I'll pass the floor now to Anna. I will remain available throughout the seminar in the chat, and I will come back at the end to share some exciting news about the revamp of the EU Whistleblowing Monitor. So Anna, thank you very much for your moderation today. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Ida. Yes, I want to welcome everybody today, and especially excited to introduce the next group of speakers. This seminar, as you know, is part of a package of activities under a project called Safe for Whistleblowers, funded by the EU. And this seminar is one of 4 altogether. The next one will be on civil society, a third one on journalists, and a final one on judges. And you can see that there's all these very important actors in the ecosystem, as we call it, for protecting whistleblowers. And whistleblowing has been and will remain a clear issue for civil society. It is in some ways a citizen's right to speak up about the public interest and to support the institutions and the public to hold power to account for decisions they make and for issues that are going wrong. Trade unions have an incredibly important role and have since the beginning of this being a kind of modern legal concept. And so I would say that trade unions have been probably involved all along. It may not have been called whistleblowing, but speaking up and trying to deal with things in the workplace. So our first speaker is going to be Camillo Rubiano, who is the legal officer of Public Services International, which is a global union organization. It's the Global Federation of Public Sector Workers, representing 30 million people in 154 countries. He's been very actively involved at PSI and also with trying to support the ILO to take action. We have Ilkka Penttinen-Puto. I hope I've said your last name correctly, Ilkka. He's the policy advisor at Eurocadres, but also chair of Transparency International Finland. So he has both the national experience of implementation of the EU directive on the ground, but he's also obviously working at the regional level with Eurocadres and with Naila Glaze. So we finally will end with Elodie Nas, who's the executive officer, I think you call yourself, of the French House of the Whistleblowers, Maison des Lanceurs d'Alerte in France. Trade unions, again, have been very active in France from the beginning of it being an issue within France, being picked up. And the French House of Whistleblowers is a unique organization in that it was set up by civil society organizations, of which trade unions are a strong membership, different ones in setting it up. So it's quite a unique institution organization in France that supports whistleblowers. So I will start with Camilo. Obviously, we're primarily focused in this session on Europe and the EU, but there is great interest and has been, and there's a lot of work being done in other countries around the world. So with your slides, I think you're going to be using, I was hoping you'd sort of answer for us in this first session, or first speaking of why PSI Global Union has been so interested in the issue, and then the focus on the ILO standard, where are we, the International Labour Organization that remains on the agenda very much because a lot of your work for doing so. So I pass it over to Camilo, and I'm going to enjoy this conversation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Anna, for the presentation and for the invitation. PSI started its advocacy some time ago, more than 10 years, when a group of affiliated organizations, mostly from Argentina, came to us and said, look, we represent a group of control bodies, the judiciary and tax revenue workers, and we are harassed, sacked, dismissed, and threatened for doing our job. At the time, we didn't have very clear what was the path that would entitle them a sort of protection. So we had to look at it. And when we look at the legal frameworks available at the time, if you can now share the slide, we found that there were actually a lot of instruments, but many of them basically didn't offer that protection. At the time when we started this, the European directive and the ISO guidelines were not yet available. But if you go to the next slide, what we found out was that the legal frameworks available, they were either non-binding on whistleblower protection, or those which were binding focused more on anti-corruption measures. If you can go to the next slide, please. So we approached the ILO and we said the following. These people, they are workers and they suffer retaliation at work. And we don't have an instrument that has a global reach to protect them. So we started by inserting little pieces of whistleblower protection or anti-corruption measures in a number of ILO instruments, and we did so between 2015 and 2018. As you can see on the screen, these instruments, again, they are not binding, but they push the ILO to make some further steps. And in 2022, if you can go to the next slide, we had a technical meeting on the protection of whistleblowers in the public sector. And this was a huge step for the ILO because they make conclusions, but they mostly said the following. First, that the whistleblowers protection was within its mandate. And second, that they agreed, without specifying, that more action was needed. If you can go to the next slide, please. This year, we made some further gains, and for the first time, an ILO binding instrument. The ones mentioned in the previous slides, they are, again, recommendations, guidelines. So this year, for the first time, an ILO instrument acknowledged the need to protect whistleblower within one ILO instrument, which is Convention 192 on biological hazards. It's still limited, but you know, it's a new milestone within the organization. In the meantime, if you can go to the next one, please. We push the ILO to its own research, and the latest of these pieces of information came at the beginning of this year. Is basically a review of 67 national laws contrasted against 14 indicators from other organizations, intergovernmental, like the United Nations Office for Drugs and Crime and the OECD, and some civil society like Transparency and the International Bar Association. The most interesting conclusion in this review is that only 5 national laws of these 67 actually hit the level of comprehensive across all the 14 indicators, which raises this question on the need of further action to keep promoting whistleblower protection across the globe. The ILO will deal again this year with the question on whether to move forward and try to adopt a comprehensive framework on whistleblower protection. We will see by the end of the year what the result would be. But we keep insisting on this, and we keep insisting with our affiliates and other unions, is that the whistleblower protection is a union issue. Is harassed, threatened for doing their jobs, and unions should get involved in order simply to protect their members.
Thank you so much, Camilo. I think that gives a really good and concise view from the international perspective, but starting, as you said, from hearing very much what was happening on the ground in different countries and wanting to push it forward. And I think it's very correct that once unions are involved, they stay involved. And certainly every organization itself, even unions, can have issues that arise within unions that need whistleblowers as well. But this is really focusing on the fact that workers all around the globe need to be able to speak up and need to be able to do so with support, and unions play an incredible role and can play a very powerful role when they get engaged, and we certainly saw that in Europe. Which leads me to moving quickly along. We'll come back to you, Camilo. Thank you so much to Ilkka, who is, as I mentioned, the policy advisor at Eurocad and chair, I think, still of Transparency International Finland. So you have these two perspectives. As we heard from Nela, Eurocad remains highly alert to the issues involved in protecting whistleblowers in Europe, and the necessity for trade unions very much to remain active. And so you have these two perspectives. Could you walk us through a little bit of the main issues that you're seeing with the EU directive and on the ground? And I hand it over to you, Ilkka.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Anna, and thank you for organizing this event. I must say, like, it's very timely, as we heard from the European Commission side. Now, I'm going to be focusing a bit on the data aspect, actually, like just so we get a bit more granular understanding. Also, sadly, it's not as granular as we would like about what is the state of the whistleblower directive and how it has been impacting trade unions and workplaces directly. But I think this will be providing us like a good scratch of the surface to know that where we are at and also where we can go from here. Because as we know, like it has been now a couple of years already when we have had this directive, and it's really showing also like now when Commission is carrying out the evaluation and assessment that what we can learn from it and what are also the gaps where we could move forward. Now, if I can have the next slide, I'm talking basically about this sort of a 3-year period here, simply because that is the reporting data from 2022 to 2024, which we have at the moment, and it really shows that this directive has been an absolutely necessary addition. We can basically see that these channels, they have been pretty much used like whenever they have been settled down in all of the stages, ranging from the centralized national channel to the company levels. And just to give sort of a very quick overview, like it's not a very long panel that we have, like it's easier to talk longer than shorter with these things. I'm going to really like scratch the surface here, as I mentioned, about how these channels are actually being used and also how these channels are not being used or how they are not useful at the moment, and explaining a bit like why is it so, as far from what we can actually draw from the understanding. Because I must say, like a lot of these issues that we have so far, we don't really have a lot of in-depth studies or data collection about it. A lot of it focuses actually on anecdotal evidence and what we already flagged in the earlier stages of the advocacy work when talking about the whistleblower directive, that how the minimum standard should be looking like. And what we knew that a lot of EU countries, they are going to go for the minimum implementation of the directive, and this is exactly what we got in most cases. And as we know, there were a couple of cases where actually the member states were even trying to go below the minimum implementation, which led into legal proceedings. But that's a completely other story. So we are going to stick more on the minimum standard in this case. Now, talking about the anecdotal evidence, one of the sort of key issues that we have been finding is that the reporting channels themselves, like they are working a bit poorly in general. In general, they do exist, but it's turning into somewhat of a tick of a box exercise, and that's also meaning that it's following very strictly the minimum standard. And this is causing a handful of different shortcomings, which are actually like hindering the effectiveness of the whistleblowing channels. For example, anonymous reporting is not very possible and is often not met on the company level, while there's also some additional risks. For example, when there's shared external whistleblower reporting channels that might be going also outside the EU, that they are actually like legal firms which are not even based in EU, which is causing issues with potential data protection and privacy even, if you're thinking it from this perspective. And then there's the whole aspect about the protection side as well. But I think like this is something that LOD will be talking much more in the future, and they have a much better understanding of this. So I'm going to focus a bit more on the channels, and then we can maybe topically roll more on the protection side of things. But just to understand the situation, there's maybe 2-3 countries where we can draw experiences from. And to move to the next slide, I'm going to showcase basically, of course, my native Finland. And if you don't know any Finnish, no worries. I'm going to summarize the statistics here because it's not very easy language to catch on, especially in a 5-minute speech. All in all, but basically what we have found out from the national statistics and reporting report of the reporting channel, of the centralized reporting channel, is that the whistleblowing channel, indeed, it's being used. The Finnish channel, the centralized channel, is basically carried out by the Chancellor of Justice's office, meaning that it's a centralized channel where they are getting all the complaints from all the sectors as in the directive, and then it's contributing those to the competent authorities from different sectors. Now, a big issue which really stands out on this data set, which I must say, like the Finnish data set is also like very much sort of a high level one, is that really the majority of the reports are actually considered to be outside the scope of the directive. And this is 77% is quite a wild number, like we are talking basically 4 out of 5 reports, which is showing already that the scope of the directive, it's quite limited. And also, it's also showing that the awareness on how to use and when to use the directive and the whistleblowing channel, it's not working very well. I must say, like I know already that the Ministry of Justice and the anti-corruption team have been carrying out a lot of trainings just to raise this awareness, but still we don't really see that has been particularly impactful in a sense. So I would assume, even though we don't have that granular data, that the big issue is exactly the scope of the directive. So it's not that the whistleblowers per se are wrong, but rather that the scope is just super limited. And this is actually reflected by the fact that the Finnish police and customs, they have already carried out on their own reporting channels. They have actually gone beyond the national legislation, beyond the directive, because they consider that the directive is not good enough, even for financial crime. I'm not even saying this from the trade unionist perspective, but also reporting financial crime, potential money laundering. Like even though there's robust legal network and framework for everything, they still do consider that if you want to have proper whistleblowing, then you have to have more ambition than what we have at the moment with the directive itself. Now, this is quite well actually backed also by the Danish data, which I have on the next slide, please. And the reporting numbers in Denmark have been higher. This is partially also because the reporting structure is a bit different. So I think they are more of the data is collected centrally. But a couple of sort of key takes from here is that the number of the reports has been growing rather, well, not really steadily, but it has grown from the first report. Denmark was an early adopter of the directive, so this is something we could actually expect as well. And this led into a situation where, well, how would I put it? Like actually, quite a lot of the reports as well, very much echoing the Finnish numbers, are also considered that they are outside the scope of the directive. So in that sense, even though there's more reports, still this sort of I think it's somewhere around 72% of all the cases they were falling outside the scope. So we are still talking like 3 out of 4 reports. So again, just really emphasizing that the scope of the directive seems to be a bit problematic when we are looking to the centralized data. Now, the Finnish data was not focusing on the private enterprises, but in Denmark we have also quite a lot of reports from the private side, and we can already see that a huge amount of companies are actually using at least a single time in a year the whistleblowing channel. So in that sense, we see that they are very much needed, at least at this point, and it's actually having a good coverage all in all. Now, there also was, especially when we are looking back to the sort of original advocacy efforts and sort of counter arguments against the whistleblowing channel, that we are getting now more data, which is also showing that a lot of those were unfounded. Especially that there was a claim from the employer side who were fearing that there might be malicious or dishonest reporting that is done via whistleblowing channels. But so far, like especially with the Danish data, we don't seem to have much backing on that one. There's very few claims or reports that seem to be errors or otherwise that they seem to have basically some dishonest purpose or motivation itself. So we are getting more information on this one. And on the next slide, we can also see a bit more better understanding on what is being reported, and also like where these and why these topics and the scope is so important for the discussion, because there's basically 3 different pieces and items which are standing out in most of the cases of the data. Here's just a couple of numbers about the rejection rates, which again are very high. But in the next slide, we are having the 3 items which are basically the 3 procedures that are usually started as a whistleblower report, which is the management management rules and processes, which are basically flagged that they are being broken, or law is directly broken, or contract or agreement. And then from the trade union perspective, this is also quite curious, like even though it's questionably a bit on the outer limit of the scope of the directive, work environment and culture and HR issues are among the top 3 of the reported issues. These 3 aspects, they really stand out heavily. Otherwise, discrimination, harassment, and I think it's sexual harassment in particular, but the automated translation of Danish is skipping that part or doesn't really get the language. But nonetheless, yeah, discrimination and harassment is also following close behind. So in that sense, we are already seeing that there's a huge proportion which is having a lot to do with this sort of a traditional workplace issues which are being raised in the whistleblowing side. So in that sense, for trade unions, actually like whistleblower directive and the channel like this proves to be one of those sort of key channels where you can officially and also effectively raise grievances or potential other conflicts in the workplace and provide it within this scope. But then again, like the scope is a bit problematic, as we know. I have a couple of slides also, if we can move next on the French case, but I know that Elodie will be talking about this in much more detail, so I'm actually not going to go into the exact composition of what is being reported. And I must say, like MLA has been doing great work on collecting the data and providing us better understanding on how much the whistleblowing channels are being used and for what, especially like to create qualitative data and create qualitative stories. So I'm really looking forward for the next panelist in that sense. Just to maybe highlight a couple of more things from the side. It's actually from MLA data, we understand also a bit better that private sector is using whistleblowing channels in the total numbers, at least in France, more than the private sector. As we learned already from Denmark, most of the private enterprises, they actually have use of the whistleblowing channel. And in these cases, it seems that at least 50% of the reports are coming from the private side of things. And then if we can just have the next slide, MLA, of course, has much more data on why the channels are being used and also what happens besides the channels being used on the protection side of things. So again, like that's more on the LOD's front. But just to summarize on the last slide from my side, basically we can see that there is not really much negatives that has been coming out of the whistleblower directive, at least like when it comes to the reporting side of things. The minimum standards have a bit problematics. Like we can basically see already that we are not even getting harmonized data from the whistleblower reports, and this is something that, of course, like Commission will be working on when they are doing the evaluation. So maybe they also will elaborate a bit their needs and understanding that we need actually some qualitative data to know how well the whistleblowing channels are working itself. But of course, like the minimum standards, that's another thing, and proper implementation. If we want to have a proper harmonized European playing field, which is really promoting the single market and culture of integrity, then we need to make sure that there's enough detail on the directive itself. And yeah, main issue, I can't emphasize this enough, that the scope of directive, when you have basically up to 80% of whistleblower complaints being falling outside the scope of the directive, then this usually shows that the scope might have quite a bit of issues, because that much it doesn't really sound that this can be all blamed on the whistleblowers themselves whatsoever. And then, yeah, as I mentioned, there was a couple of other issues which are a bit more technical of nature, how much anonymous reporting channels and practices are, for example, taken on board. But this is something that in this time frame, I'm not going to go deeper into that. So leading from that to the French case, I think I'm going to hand it first back to Anna and then forward to Elodie. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Ilkka. It's always great to get into the detail and to see some of the data because it gives us much more concrete information to work with about how the implementation is going, but also because it's a reminder none of these things are new. If you've been working on whistleblowing in national content pre-EU, national contexts pre-EU directive, these were issues that are practical issues that come up on the ground for employers, for authorities. The fact that the Finnish authorities, the police and customs, are going beyond immediately because they want to cover what they need to hear about, and it's not quite being covered in the scope that's come down, means that they are seeing what they need to use it for because that's within their scope of authority to address. So I think, again, we all know from our experience that there is the widest scope possible is helpful because it's the public interest, and where it is harmed or abused, you know, there are new ways to do it, and sometimes that comes up and you can't preordain that. And it also would be very good to know of the ones that are being rejected, getting into the weeds of that data to find out what type, so people can see what the problem is, and that gives you a very big advocacy tool if there are issues that obviously people think should be protected. I'm moving quickly along to Elodie. Elodie, as I mentioned, is the executive officer of MLA, the Maison des Lanceurs d'Alerte. But I failed to mention that since its creation, it has supported and protected and worked with 450 whistleblowers. So it's very active in this space. And I hope, in talking to you, obviously you do not have slides, which is fine. And very happy to see your face and to talk to you directly. But obviously trade unions, it'd be really interesting to know what the issues are in France now and how trade unions have been involved. Not only, again, this is a context in which there was a whistleblowing law beforehand, so how they were involved in that implementation. And then obviously France was one of the countries that was able to implement it in a much more creative and smart way, using what was in the directive to enhance some of the protections that were in the French law already. So I hand it over to you, Elodie.
Thank you so much, Anna, and hello to everyone. Yeah, as Anna said, the French House of Whistleblowers, la Maison des Lanceurs d'Alerte, is a unique organization set up in 2018 by, at the time, 17 organizations, non-profit NGOs, and trade unions. So we aim at protecting whistleblowers by helping them face difficulties and at the same time advocating for an improvement of their legal protection. So we support whistleblowers at several levels. We provide legal support because while facing a legislation that is often very complex and hard to understand, it is difficult for the people wishing to speak up to know what steps to take. And the law is still quite new, and we observe that neither the potential whistleblowers nor the lawyers or the judges are really familiar yet with the law. We also provide psychological support. We work with professional psychologists to provide one-on-one support to the most vulnerable whistleblowers. It has to be said that the psychological and economic assistance is enshrined in the law, but is not applied in practice. So, of course, non-profit organizations such as the MLA have to compensate for the non-application of the law. We also provide financial support to whistleblowers in precarious situation and in need of emergency financial assistance. Obviously, regarding to our limited resources, we only have a small amount to share every year. And we also provide media support by making connections with journalists and also talking with the journalists to see how they can protect more the whistleblowers by doing their jobs. And finally, the Maison des Lanceurs d'Alerte works with public authorities and raise public awareness to improve the law and make the protection of whistleblowers more effective in France. About the trade unions. So from the very beginning, trade unions have been strongly involved in the MLA, but also in promoting whistleblower protection. Well, we can say that trade unions in France are quite competitive. I don't know if it's the case in other countries too. So in our action, we have to be very mindful about balancing the union families. But clearly, we managed to get them working together, and it's very helpful to do our work. Trade unions have definitely a specific role to play according to the directive, because well, the union. The trade union are like sometimes the first contact to whistleblower in the workplace, and they can make a difference in a good sense or in a bad sense for whistleblowers. From a specific point of view, we experimented in the past some conflicts in the MLA between some whistleblowers whom we have supported and trade unions. In practice, we note that there is sometimes a misunderstanding of how the trade union works and how the decision is made. That is to say, who can decide and who can give orders or not. And we experimented, we saw that some whistleblowers felt injured by the gap between the commitment of union at the national level and a part of the reality on the ground, which clearly depends on union actors. Because indeed, the decision to support or not an employee cannot be taken at the national level. So to go beyond, we took the decision to focus a part of our work on improving knowledge of trade unions about whistleblowing and on raising awareness among their members. This is for us very key. So as I said, as the union is sometimes the first person to turn to. So as also a part of the Safe for Whistleblower project, we organize workshops to discuss trade union experiences as facilitators. And we worked on an anonymous short survey completed by 316 respondents. And the result of our survey were very interesting to explore. it really confirmed the need to raise awareness about whistleblowers and more specific about their facilitators' role, as we found that respondents had a basic understanding of whistleblowing law, but procedures, list of competent authority, deadlines have to be clarified. Also, we identified main challenges for trade unions on protecting whistleblowers. At the national or European level, the need to propagate the information and obviously the role they have to play to all levels of the organization, and not only at the national or European level. It also could be great to communicate on good practices and good story with the union representative at the local level supporting with success whistleblowers. Also, we identify a challenge in articulating the whistleblower protection to the other mission and action of the trade unions. And for example, in France, we have a lot of discussion about the public debt, and protecting the whistleblowers is also a way to find money, like fighting corruption, for example. So it's interesting to articulate the whistleblower protection to the current debate. And also, we identify that trade union has a role to play on advocacy in their field of action. For example, trade union in the public finances sector have a role to play regarding the dedicated external authority. And I give this example because we are working actually currently with a public finance trade union about the role of the external authority in public finance. So these are like the main challenges we identified, and the ideas we got on the trade union role on whistleblower protection.
That's great. Thank you so much, Elodie. That was really enlightening. I think, again, that on the ground practice is obviously very challenging. So the theory of whistleblowing, even working with the policies and the laws, and we get them in there. But I think, how the reality on the ground works can feel opposite, even for trade unions, even for civil society organizations working at the international level. However, I think one of the things that is clear from all of the speakers today is that what was put into the directive very much was based, and the people really advocating and really working on the detail of what should be in there had national or on the ground experience. And the shoulds and shalls of the directive for us, all of it was shalls, or were shoulds. These were things that are well calibrated. So when you don't have things or nations implement and leave out sections or do the absolute minimum on some but look good on others, it can actually not work in practice, because that will be the gap that undermines a whistleblower and undermines the organization in dealing with it properly. One of the things you said that I just really struck me is years ago when I was, and Ida will know this, who also worked at Public Consumer Work, now Protect, different time to me, but she will probably recognize it as well, in the UK, was we did work with Unison, one of the biggest public sector unions in the UK. And we had 2 pamphlets that we supported them to do. Of course, they were written, they were actual pamphlets. And one was your rights as a trade union, as a member of as a worker in the UK. And one was for representatives working with whistleblowers. And we would often get the representatives calling us to get some advice on how to handle and talk to a whistleblower, or the whistleblower saying, could you talk to my union representative so we don't mix it up? And it was very helpful. And they were the only 2 pamphlets that got that they had to reprint numerous times because everyone wanted them. So To me, this has been clearly on the ground an issue for decades. It's not new. And trade unions being involved at the national level is wonderful. We need to advocate for the protections, and then they need to work with their representatives. And because you're right, there's some disconnects. There will always be disconnects of what the role of a union is and how well it can help all workers, like journalists working with sources. Sometimes there's points at which their roles can slightly clash. Thank you so much. We'll come back. And maybe we can get the speakers to all put on their cameras so that we're a group. I was going to ask Camilo again a quick question back, and we have maybe about 10 minutes more about how much the EU directive, from your perspective, could help. You know, some of what you see in the EU directive could, because it's the newest on the block, other than the UNCAC UN resolution, which is, again, not necessarily binding, but is a very important resolution on whistleblowing that's now been made at the international level. But how much aspects of the EU directive perhaps could help push the agenda globally, or anything else that you'd like to pick up on outside of the ILO, which you've worked for, and the standard, about where the unions and the points of engagement could be? Because for unions nationally, there's the work they do there, but they also rely on some of these international standards or international collective action to help their work nationally. Camilo?
Thanks, Anna. Well, the EU directive is and will keep being highly influential on the next step for us, being the only binding international/regional framework devoted exclusively to whistleblowers. First is persuasive for the work we are doing with the other regions. Second, it will pave the way within the ILO, because it means that the EU member states, members also of the International Labour Organization and other partners that work closely with the EU, will not oppose similar legislation or a similar framework expanded to other regions, like we said, a global ILO framework. And third, because we learned from the experience of the implementation of the EU directive. There are when we deal with other governments and employers within the ILO, they raise a number of doubts which are genuine, and the implementation of the directive will help us reassure them that implementing whistleblower protection will not put an undue pressure on their businesses or in other activities of the government. So it's a learning experience, and it will help us, keep promoting this within the ILO.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we were very aware of that you were doing at the ILO, was bringing, again, civil society and trade unions, national ones, to the technical meeting in Geneva, for example, and making sure their voices were heard. So, it's great work that you're doing. So it is a two-way street, these kind of international standards, regional and national work, and trade unions have great resources. One thing that I need to mention is that Volume 32, Issue 1 of the International Union Rights, we'll send that around to you. We have the PDF of the volume, which was a special focus on trade union and whistleblower protection in May. It was published in May. It is behind a firewall, a membership wall. So we can't send you a link, and we ask that you not publish it at all, but we were given permission to send that round to you after the session, so that you could see and read a copy of that issue to see some of the perspectives and some of the authors you will recognize. Ilka, I think listening to both, from both perspectives, you at the regional level and national, but listening to Camilo and Elodie, where do you think unions, what are the key issues for unions, perhaps Eurocad as well? I know Nela's here, about, facing both the implementation, but just union rights across Europe. How can we both use the directive, but also use the weight of all of us who are working in this space to really continue to push for changes to the EU directive and really push on the ground for trade unions to take an active role. Do you feel like there's room to push for that at the European level?
Well, I mean, in practice, this is what we are going to do at Eurocadres office. This evaluation process that the Commission is carrying out, like that's going to be, of course, the key venue where we are doing the advocacy work. So that is something that needs to be taken on board, of course. Just actually a big quick reflection on that one. I'm very happy that we got the UNCAC convention as well mentioned, because that's actually exactly going a bit further than the whistleblower directive itself, and this is. And it's coming from UNCAC, basically the initiative of the Finnish police and customs authority, where they wanted to go further. So in that sense, it's even though they are, of course, like non-binding initiatives, but they still lead this sort of a work forward and show what are the actual best practices. Now, I mean, it's very timely. Like how would I say, the social dimension is always being contested quite a bit, and whistleblowing nonetheless should be one of those topics which everybody should identify as a win-win. Not to use as a pun on this context, but nonetheless, this sort of a work and trust that is being created already on the early implementation of the whistleblower channels and the reporting mechanism, that should also land on the company level to make both actually the organizations themselves and the workers to develop trust and start utilizing the channels better, because basically wrongdoings, they wouldn't benefit anybody. So this should be a no-brainer, but as we know, like things rarely ever are. Now, I'm having a feeling actually like the social dialogue issue, which is of course necessary in a couple of levels. Like we need to have the company level, so sort of a practical social dialogue on planning how the channels should be working, where they should be going, and also having workers representatives on that. But also a sort of a further discussion about the relationship and trust and integrity in the workplaces in general. Because as we know, basically the trade unions and social dialogue is absolutely necessary, like for not only setting up the channels, but also providing support for the whistleblowers themselves. And we know that whistleblowing channels, on the other hand, it's really creating the culture of integrity. Most of the whistleblowers actually, like as we know from the studies already, they do not first approach the whistleblowing channels, but they first try to raise these issues inside the organizations, and only when they are facing some blocks, that's where it stops. So in that sense, this is very much sort of a hunch at this very moment, not a very academic article, but when you are basically promoting whistleblower rights, whistleblower channels, that's how you change the culture. That's how you know that the complaints need to be taken seriously. That's how you create this culture of integrity. And this sort of the holy triangle I'm trying to point out here, where the whistleblowing channels and trade unions and culture of integrity, they are basically interconnected very closely. And I'll say, like, especially at this time and era where social dialogue and social partners relationship is quite strained, like this is one of those venues where we not only have to, but where we also can develop collaboration and cooperation. So to put it back into the sort of a big picture, like this is not only only an issue of whistleblowing itself, but also social rights in general, and where we are trying to go as the European social model.
Great, Hilka. And I should mention, I think Ida's been putting quite a few resources into the chat for all of you. And one of them is the Eurocad Whistleblowing Toolkit, which is an online course. It's multi-language and it's for union representatives on whistleblowing systems and legal frameworks. So again, using that and feeding back to Eurocad about what they need now is very helpful, because we know there can be layers of complexity that representatives are dealing with actually on the ground. And this was a really important toolkit, I think, published quite soon after the EU directive came into force. And I'm sure they're happy to look at that and see what else they can offer. But also unions thinking about training and awareness raising, which brings me back to Elodie. It would be great to get, and you started to reflect on that and say a little bit, maybe you want to say a little bit more about this issue with trade unions. Also, I think one of the things that we're feeling is in Europe and around the world is the strained relationships that are starting to happen, the social relationships being questioned, things becoming politicized very quickly. But also some whistleblower cases are going to be politicized. What we have found over the years, and I'd be really interested in your reflection on this, is because whistleblowers are often just showing what's going wrong that will affect other people, whether it's abuse of care, environmental damage, which affects real communities everywhere. Those kind of issues are really helpful to get rid of this politicization, that it is a public interest common thing that people on the ground can understand and citizens can understand. So it would be really interesting to know from you if you're experiencing some of these tensions and how you are trying to respond to them. And you've said that it'd be good to know a little bit more about how you're putting the trade union work on the a bit more on the front burner for you at the Maison des Lanceurs d'Alerte.
Well, first, I would like to outline, as Ilka mentioned it, that in France we lack of the whistleblowing culture, of the whistleblowing protection culture. We still see the whistleblower like a snitch. I think this is the word, because of the history and because we don't have like the same vision of than the Anglo-Saxon definition of whistleblower. So is it still so important to work on the whistleblowing culture? And I mentioned the judges, the lawyers, and also the trade unions and the general public, that they all need to be more aware of the importance and the need to protect whistleblower. So we definitely have a great chance. It is a real opportunity for us to work so closely with trade unions, and it's well, it's very great to have such an access to trade unions and work together. And about your question, I think this is a very good point. In France, like in other countries in Europe, we have to face difficult political and social
Sorry, could all the participants please ensure that their mics are muted? Thank you. Go ahead, Elodie.
So the situation in France is quite tense at the political and social level. We are like very concerned by the rise of the far right, actually, and currently the deadlock in the National Assembly. But to have all these members, trade unions and civil society organizations with different point of view and different concerns in the same board, it's like really powerful, because we have like some very great discussions. And I mean, we these discussions are political discussion, but we have like the same interest and the same idea to how can we protect whistleblowers in a future that is quite dark or more darker, and the opportunity to have all these members and all these organizations it's a strength, I think. Yeah. I don't know if
Yes, you did. That's great. I think you're bringing out the fact that it crosses groups, it crosses political boundaries, when issues that any side of a political spectrum would see as being something they would need to deal with. Obviously, some will back away from certain types of disclosures, but it is a way to bring the public on board. It is very much a public issue. And so even though there are these cultures which still exist in many countries where the whistleblowers can be viewed with suspicion, they can also be seen as very important when they're speaking up about things that most people would say they care about. because it affects them in their daily life. And that's the connection that trade unions can help the whistleblower protection community, you know, really make stronger and more effective. We've come up to the end of our time for the speakers. Camilo and Ilka, is there anything else you'd like to add? No, you're fine. We've asked for questions.
I think we are quite okay, yeah.
Okay, we've asked for questions in the chat. We haven't had any come up that I can see, unless Ida, you've seen them. I wanted to say just before I hand it back over to Ida, and she can let me know and ask some of the questions if they're there. I wanted to really thank Ida and Ed. So Ida is at TI Ireland, and they're the ones that the funding for the EU whistleblowing monitor activities, of which this seminar is one in a package. Ida's leading that work with working with Ed in particular and Wynne. And she'll talk about a little bit about the relaunch of the monitor. So if you've seen the monitor sort of seem a bit stagnant, it's because there's been a lot of work in progress behind the scenes. But really to thank TI Ireland and Ida for all the hard work she's done over these activities, and for Ed to continue in keeping the monitor up to date. He's in the background, but he's there, and some of you will know him because he's a communications officer for Wynne. So I'd like to hand it back to Ida. I'm just good. Yeah.
Yes.
Ida,
thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. That was very, very informative and interesting. I haven't seen any questions come through the chat. They haven't come through to me directly, but I wonder, in light of the comments of the Commission earlier regarding the upcoming evaluation of implementation of these laws, whether we might just quick fire one question to each of the panelists. The question is, knowing that the Commission are going to be looking at this, there will be a consultation process and a lot of invites to social partners, trade unions, civil society organisations to feed back on how they think things are going at the national level. What would be your opinion on the most pressing issue for the Commission to be looking at when it comes to either implementation generally, you know, what could be better, or regarding the role of trade unions, whether that's strengthening that role or giving them more funding to provide support measures? What would be your top key priority? And I guess we'll ask that to Camilo first.
Thanks, Ida. I think one of the key issues would be to make sure that EU member states comply with the directive and assess whether those lagging behind need more support or not, or it's just lack of political will. As I said before, for us, from a global perspective, the EU directive is our blueprint. If it doesn't work, it will affect the work elsewhere. Whereas if it succeeds, it will be, as I said before, very influential to the work we do in other regions.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Camilo. And Ilka?
While I very much echo what Camilo said, and also how crucial EU development is actually for ILO side, I must say that I can't, after talking so much about the scope of directive, say anything else. Of course, like if I would have a wish list for Santa, how the whistleblower directive and its implementation would be looking like, there would be a lot of points on that one. But if you have a directive, which is having the reporting channel, and up to 77%, let's use the Finnish example, of the reports are falling outside the scope, then that's definitely something that needs to be revisited. We know also from the practical experiences that this is very often the case, and it's and actually, like, even in whistleblower cases where we are talking about the sort of fundamental pieces that it was made for, basically like anti-corruption, the financial interest of the union itself. But even in those cases, the scope does not necessarily work in a sense that the whistleblowers are being protected, and also that the reports are taken on board properly. National implementation, absolutely an important piece. Like we know from countries like Hungary that there are certain certain governments who are just politically struggling a lot to take these things on board, and that's going to have multiple effects. But if I would have to say one thing in practice what to take on board, it's really expanding the scope. So, and this is just really quickly to return back to the first pitch of the Commission. There has been a big trend, like when we are looking to the EU's reporting regulations for companies, which is focusing on simplification, which has been the buzzword for deregulation, essentially. Now, expanding the scope would go completely against it. So honestly, like I'm rather worried in the same time that do we have that sort of political momentum also to go forward on EU level, to actually expand, to add ambition in a sort of a situation where we see a lot of regression in a lot of compliance and regulation standards. So this, in the same time, like sort of like spinning from what Camilla was mentioning, like this is not only national implementation and national political will issue, but also on EU level, we need to see that political will to go forward. So yeah, technical level, I want to see more scope. On the practical level, I actually want to see just more politicians who want to be backing this up.
Yes, yes. I guess it's whether these protections, even if there was the political will at the beginning, will stand the test of time as these huge global changes and EU changes as well. Okay, thank you very much, Ilka. And then finally, Elodie, would you like to come in? What would you at Maison Lanceur d'Alerte like to see the focus on when it comes to implementation?
Well, first of all, the national law has to comply the directive, but also the national law has to be applied in practice. It's our very first idea, and maybe regarding the trade unions, I think there's something that we have to look after. With the national external authority and the participation of the contribution of the trade unions in this case, because the external authority we have a lack of information from the external authorities, and maybe it could be interesting that that trade unions could have access to this information. So maybe regarding the trade union, it's something that we can explore.
Yes, and I've shared in the chat again the briefing paper that we launched during the seminar earlier on, and I think that's one of the key points that we say in the briefing, that trade unions could have a better role setting the standards and working with the external authorities as well. Thank you very much, Elodie. Perhaps following on to that, and maybe this is a question for Anna, who has good sight on the role of civil society on whistleblower protection and their relationship with trade unions. John is asking, we haven't yet discussed this, John, no, but has there been any reluctance among trade unions to work with civil society on this issue? And are you familiar with cases where trade unions have refused to support whistleblowers, where whistleblowers have sought advice from a CSO? So I guess that's picking up on the kind of different support pieces for whistleblowers. Anna, did you want to come in on that finally?
Definitely, and John's probably had some of his experience, having already had experience on an advice line. So, and maybe Elodie could say something, and the other speakers might have a comment. I think this is where some of the lack of education, the representatives and the union really understanding the role of whistleblower. I think in the UK, there was quite a bit of issue early on that trade unions were under attack, and then whistleblowing could actually be seen as a bit of a threat, or they would see individual whistleblowers going, as being accusing another trade union member and not teasing out the public interest issue in there, or feeling like there was some sort of conflict of interest. When the trade union really worked on it themselves, and at the senior level and the leadership, they could really help with some of those. There are some sticky issues, and certainly when you have someone seeking advice from two different places, that can be a problem. for the CSO as much as it could be for a trade union representative. The idea that they wouldn't be refused, though, for any sort of reassessment or looking at it, or what we would do, of course, and John may already do this or know about it, we would say that the trade union representative could get in touch with our advice line, for example, so we could have a discussion around what are the issues, and if they needed any extra legal advice for the case, they could have access to that, an expert. And some trade unions really promoted that you could, the union representatives who had a case could seek some advice from just some of the issues that might be affecting it. But Camilo, is this something that you've picked up on at all, that there's been some tension between civil society and organizations that might be working in this space and trade unions and or Elodie? Camilo, maybe?
I'm not aware of any such case in particular with regard to whistleblowers protection, but yes, historically there has been some reluctance from trade unions to work with other civil society organizations. You know, competition for the space, kind of jealousy. But this is not the time for such kind of behavior. We should all cooperate and work together. Otherwise, we won't achieve our goals. If I can add something else, is yeah, there has been also, we are aware that there has been some issues because, yes, of course, sometimes trade union members are involved in corruption. We are made of the same kind of material that the other organizations are made of, humans, and yeah, we are not exempted from yeah, those situations. And of course, when whistleblowers point the finger at the trade union member, this creates such tensions. It was mentioned in the question. But there is no room for that. There is no room for or excuses not to work with others on this topic.
Just a quick point for me, when we did have the advocacy for the EU directive, I have never seen such a coming together before then of trade unions, journalist associations, anti-corruption, transparency, democracy, accountability, and whistleblower protection organizations. And that made us a very powerful force. So I do think that tide is turning. Elodie, did you want to respond at all?
Yeah, because
And
I
Ilka,
think,
of course.
yeah, this is the, we have to make a distinction, difference between the national level and the local level, because in our experience, we have, as I explained, we have like very good relationship at the national level, and we can talk about a case, and it's very nice and it's okay. But this is where the misunderstanding about the functioning of trade union is important, because at the local level we had a lot of cases that whistleblower don't understand the difference of position between the local representative and the discourses at the communication at the national level. So because there is a non-hierarchy, no hierarchy between the local and the national level, depending on the trade union system, it's kind of difficult to articulate the national and the local level, but we can still have some discussions and trying to articulate all these different levels.
Ida, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Well, we have very sadly come to the end of the time. So I just wanted to grab 2 minutes, if you will hear me out. Thank you, Elodie, thank you to all the speakers, to Ilka, to Camilo, to Elodie, and also to Anna for moderating. I just wanted to, and Ed, if you could just share the second to last slide there, just to let you know that we mentioned a few times about the redevelopment of the EU whistleblowing monitor. I did put a link into the chat. please, at the end of next week, go on, perhaps on Friday, take a look. There's a number of very exciting new functionality on there. There will be a compliance dashboard to look at the national efforts against sort of best practice criteria. There will be a timeline which will show the chronology of events from the adoption of the law. They're now being reformed. Infringement proceedings are now underway regards delayed transposition and eventually, once we have the evaluation, perhaps poor transposition as well. So there's a huge amount of work, as Anna said. If you are interested, if you see a resource that might be missing, that you think that the citizens, general public in your country may benefit from, do send us some information. We do collaborate. Some of the national voluntary country editors are trade unionists, so it's again showing that collaboration between civil society and trade unions. So yes, an exciting piece of work that we're very much looking forward to getting live at the end of next week. And on the final side, a slightly drier note, please do take a few minutes to complete a survey. It is required by our donor to do this. The information that you need to input is there on the slide. You can use the QR code on your phone or copy and paste that link into your browser. It just takes a few minutes, and it's very important. If you've enjoyed the seminar today, or if you haven't, please just take a few moments to give the feedback that we need to show that today took place and improve the next session. So thank you very much indeed to everyone for participating. Please do reach out if there are any questions or any follow-up to any of what's been said by the speakers today, and wishing you all a very good rest of the day. Take good care of yourselves and hope to see you soon. We'll leave this information on the slide for a few more minutes. Yes, thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.